Well, welcome everybody to the July 2021 general meeting of the Astronomical Society of Kansas City. We've got a favorite featured speaker with us tonight, David Levy. I am going to turn it over to our new Vice President, Kevin Walker, and ask him to introduce our guest speaker for the evening.
Well, thank you, Terry. Really excited about tonight. First, before I get started with introducing David, I do want to say thank you to Jackie. I think Jackie's done a great job of getting our guest speakers lined up for the past several years and left things in good hands. So hopefully I will transition over smoothly. One last thing I want to mention. In the last edition of the Cosmic Messenger, I did ask if people had ideas for guest speakers. I would love to hear from you. Unfortunately, I put in my wrong email address. And so if you've been emailing suggestions, I'm not getting them. And I would ask you to send them again. The proper email is kmwalker18@gmail.com. It's missing the M in the article. So sorry if anybody sent those in. But enough of that. I want to get to David because really excited to hear this presentation. Those of you that have been part of ASKC or have been involved in astronomy at any level are highly likely to be familiar with David Levy and his legacy of work. You know, he's discovered more than 20 comets. He's written numerous books, but most notably for tonight, he was the co-discoverer of Shoemaker-Levy 9. And I think many of you are probably very familiar with that comet. And its eventual impact into Jupiter. Quite an attention-getting spectacle. And so we asked David to talk tonight about the discovery and the impact and the legacy and all of that. So really looking forward to this. And so without further ado, David, welcome and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and thank you so much, Jackie. I'm not sure that you can hear me right now, but I'm hoping you'll be able to at some point. Anyway, I'm very glad to be here. I have been at virtually every meeting in the last several months, usually with a very brief quotation, but not tonight, because you'll be getting a lot of quotations tonight. Anyway, Jackie asked if I would talk about comet hunting that I've done, and in particular, the story of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, which is clearly the most important comet with which I've been associated with over my lifetime. I started astronomy at Twin Lake Camp in Vermont in 1956. I was 8 years old. It was the 4th of July, and I saw a shooting star. It began in Draco, and it wasn't very bright. It must have been about 3rd magnitude maybe, but somehow I noticed it, and it sort of headed off and disappeared not too far from the bright star Vega. And I was going up to our cabin with the other little boys, and I asked them if any of them had seen a shooting star just now, and the other boys said no. And then I was thinking about that in my little David brain, and I thought, was that a message just for me? And did that meteor, was it trying to tell me something that I should really get interested in this? Anyway, I put the whole thing into my mind and left it there for a while. A few years later, I was involved in a bicycle accident. I was on my way to a picnic, and I fell off my bike and broke my arm. And I then I had this lovely cast, got a lot of people to sign it, and it was a lot of fun. But my cousin gave me a book called Our Sun and the Worlds Around It, a golden fun to learn book. And I read it, and I was just overwhelmed with it. I was overwhelmed with the idea of the solar system and comets and meteors and all these things in the sky, and just thinking just how enjoyable that could be just to do that. And I remember Dad telling me one day, a couple of years later, all he cares about are his darn stars. I also remember a few years after that, number of years after that, him finally taking me aside and saying, when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And I sure as hell was wrong with that. You really took the stars that you were passionate about and you went with them and you did something with them. And so that was fine, except that Dad was right. As a youngster, I was very arrogant. I was a know-it-all. I talked too much and knew too little. And finally, I was able to get a telescope, then a larger telescope, and then a smaller telescope. And that's the one I'd like to show you right now. This is not a background. This is the real telescope. I got it in 1967. It arrived in the middle of an unhappy experience I was having with the Montreal Center of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada at the time. I'd gotten into an argument with the observations director, and she tried to have me expelled from the society. The day after the board of directors meeting, where they said, yes, you're right, he is arrogant, he has a big mouth, but he's also pretty enthusiastic, and I think it's wrong. Why don't we just send him a nasty letter, but not take his membership away? Anyway, then the very next day, this telescope arrived. It is named now Minerva, after the Roman goddess of wisdom, because I think I could have used some in those days. And I really did enjoy taking it out. This is the only telescope I have that did not have its first light looking at Jupiter. It had its first light actually looking at the gibbous moon on that night in May of 1967. I still use it. I've used it for countless hours of searching for comets. I started my search program for comets on the 17th of December, 1965, with a 10-minute search between the stars Pollux and Castor in Gemini. And even now, whenever Pollux and Castor come up, as they are about to before dawn now, or in a few weeks, I always like to do that again, just to go over that wonderful area of sky. It's a very rich area. There's a lot there, but it's also a very small area. Anyway, I remember being asked by our French oral teacher, a Mr. Hodgson at Westmount High School, what I wanted to do as a career. And I remember sitting up and saying, Monsieur Hodgson, je veux découvrir une comète. Mr. Hutchinson, I would like to discover a comet. But I do remember his response to that. He looked at me and glared and said, how in heaven's name do you ever expect to make any money doing something like that? And everybody in the room just started laughing, including me, including him. And he said, okay, I'm going to give you credit for this answer, if only because it's the strangest answer to this question I've ever received. But you better discover a comet for me within 20 years, because if you don't, I'm going to come back and I'm going to lower your mark. Anyway, I started and went for almost that long before I discovered my first comet. My first comet was discovered on the 13th of November, 1984, 19 years after I began my search. And it was really very, very special that I was able to enjoy that and continue doing that, including a relocation to Arizona, where I live now, and to be able to actually proceed through to my first discovery. If I had been smart, I would have done what I wanted to do as soon as I found my first comet, moved back to Canada, continue my life there. But a first discovery just whets your appetite, and I wanted to go on for some more. Incidentally, around the same time that I began my search for comets, another comet hunter living in Ohio named Leslie C. Pelter published his autobiography. It's called Starlight Nights. And this was long before Halley's Comet appeared, long before I was able to enjoy Halley's Comet. But I want to read to you what he wrote about Halley's Comet. Within historic times, 28 visits by Halley's Comet had been recorded. On an early trip, it witnessed the defeat of Attila's Huns in AD 451. It arrived in time to preside over the Norman conquest in 1066. In the year 1456, the menacing appearance of the comet so alarmed Pope Calixtus that he decreed several days of prayer and established the midday Angelus. With a great clanging of bells, he then besought the comet to visit its wrath solely on the invading Turks. In 1607, it was watched by both Shakespeare and Kepler. And I believe that. I know Kepler would have seen it, and I certainly would believe that Shakespeare would have seen it as well. And I like to think that it was also seen by Captain John Smith and Pocahontas in the frontier skies of Jamestown. On his following trip around in 1682, the comet was observed by Halley himself, who probed into its periodic past and bequeathed to it an honored name that it can bear with pride throughout the solar system. By 1835, when it returned, affairs of Earth had speeded up. Many a canal boat traveler looking down could see the comet glowing on the surface of his highway. Humanity himself had taken to the skies when the comet last appeared in 1910. Remember, this was published long before 1986, for he was making fledgling flights of perhaps 100 miles. In 1986, our historic visitor will be visited in turn, for in that year, a spacecraft from Earth will hold a rendezvous with Halley's Comet out in space. Who would venture to foretell the wonders and achievements which the comet will witness in that distant year of 2061 or 2062? Or will man himself prove periodic? Will the Huns be back again? I've always loved that line, and certainly gives one a lot to ponder, especially in these pandemic days. In 1987, first week of that year, I discovered my second comet, and my third a few months later. By now I was getting the hang of it, and I was finding comets at the rate of about one a year. Found one in 1989, one in 1990, one in 1991. And by that time, I had gotten to know Gene and Carolyn Shoemaker, and they invited me to join them occasionally for observations at Palomar Observatory using the 18-inch telescope. And 1991 turned into 92, turned into 93. On March the 23rd of 1993, we were sitting waiting for some clouds to disappear. And we went outside and looked up, and the sky looked really pretty bad. And I looked up at the sky and I said, you know, there is a break in the sky over there. And Gene looked at me and he laughed and he said, David, that's our David, that's our eternal optimist. One tiny little area of the sky is clear and he wants to observe. David, Gene said, I have to tell you that every time we slap a piece of film into that telescope, it costs $8. We simply cannot afford to be taking photographs of the night sky looking for asteroids and comets on a night like tonight. We can't do it. I noticed that I had reminded Gene that we had a bunch of bad film that we had collected. It was usable, but not film that we'd like to use, and certainly not film we would want to publish in any way. And I said, you know, that film's already wasted. We wouldn't be spending any money if we went on doing that. Gene started to laugh, but Carolyn looked up and said, you know, Gene, he's right. The sky is beginning to clear a little bit over there. And Gene looked at Carolyn, Carolyn looked at me, I looked at Gene, and Gene said, let's do it. So we went back to the telescope, put a film into the camera, and now I'm going to share my screen very briefly to show you the first two pictures. Are you seeing this now? I'm hoping that you are. I'm hoping you're seeing this picture because it's a little embarrassing if you're not.
We do see it.
Yeah,
You
we see it.
Great, thank you. Thanks for telling me. Now I can go on without embarrassment. These are the two discovery photographs that we took that night. And you can see Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 on those pictures. And you can see the comet is in a slightly different position on the right-hand picture from what it is on the left-hand picture. And now that we've all seen that picture, I can stop sharing. And let's see if I can do that. Stop sharing. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, there we are. Now we're back to me. Okay, that is the only slide that I have to show tonight. I did prepare a slide presentation with music, but because you're being broadcast on Facebook as well, Facebook, I understand, has really stringent rules about playing music, so I thought I'd just leave that alone. So you just get me. Anyway, we took those pictures and went on, and it actually, between the first picture, the one on the left, and the second picture, the one on the right, we should have been about 45 minutes apart, but because clouds came by again, it was almost 2 hours before we were able to get the second set of pictures. The next day was the 24th. It was cloudy and raining. And the day after that was the 25th of March. Jean was reading Time magazine. I was checking my email. Carolyn was scanning the pictures that Jean and I had taken on the night of the 23rd. And suddenly she's looking down and she looks up and she says, "Jean, David, I don't know what I've got, but it looks like a squashed comet." Jean stood up and took control of the stereo microscope, and Carolyn walked over towards me. And I looked at Carolyn, I said, "You are joking, I hope, aren't you?" And she said, "No, I'm not." Anyway, Jean looked at this thing, and then he looked at me with a look on his face I had never, ever noticed before. It was a look of absolute puzzlement. I had to go take a look at it, and I saw essentially the pictures that I just showed to you. And it was really strange. And we were wondering, we certainly needed to report it immediately. And after we sent in our announcement to the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams, which was run at the time by Dr. Brian Marsden, we tried to get someone, because it was totally cloudy where we were, to confirm our comet for us. Anyway, I was looking there, and I suggested that we get my friend Jim Scotty, who that very night was observing from Kitt Peak National Observatory in just west of Tucson. And I happen to know that it was fairly clear where he was. And so I persuaded them to call Jim. And I called him and I explained that we had this unusual object. It looked like a comet, but it was the strangest comet we've ever seen. But would you mind taking a look at it? And he said, "Well, I'm kind of busy right now. If I get the time, the next couple of hours, I'll send the telescope over and look at it." And he had a mighty 36-inch diameter telescope. And really would get a nice image of it if he was able to. So we waited. There was nothing left to do. It was cloudy where we were. And we just waited. A couple of hours later, what we did do is we took the discovery images to another telescope and we measured them to get accurate positions, using the center of the comet as the place to measure. We got back to our dome and I decided to give Jim another call again. And he picked up the phone, he going, who? And I said, is that you, Jim? And he said, uh-huh. I said, Jim, did you get a chance? Did you get a chance to look for our suspect? And he said, sorry, David, the sound you just heard is me picking my jaw off the floor. And I said, do we have a comet? And he said, oh my goodness, do you ever have a comet? It was the strangest thing he had ever seen before. The next day it was announced as Comet Shoemaker-Levy. And about 3 or 4 weeks later, when it was deemed that it was a periodic comet, it was changed to Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. It was our 9th periodic comet that we as a team had found. The Shoemaker-Levy team had found. Next comes May 22nd, 1993. Again, we're in the observatory. It was my birthday that day. And we're looking at the, again, Gene was not reading Time magazine. He was inside the darkroom preparing film for that night. Carolyn again was scanning and I was checking my email. And it turned out there were 2 messages from the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams, 2 bulletins. The first one, they both had to do with our comet. And I said, Carolyn, there are 2 messages about our comet coming out. And I brought up the first one. And I remember talking with Brian years earlier. And I remember asking him, if someone were to discover a comet that was going to hit the Earth or another planet, how would you inform the world? And he said, David, I would probably simply publish the ephemeris of the comet. And it would simply have a section in it, which is the delta factor, which actually gives you the distance between the comet and the Earth. And you simply see that distance getting slower and slower and slower until the distance between the comet and the Earth was less than the radius of the Earth. And then you could figure out that the comet was going to collide. That's exactly what he did. He came out with an ephemeris that showed this comet getting closer and closer to Jupiter. And the last one showed it at a radius of about 0.3 Jovian radii from the center of Jupiter. And but there was a second announcement. And so I decided I better read that before I say anything. The second one, he admitted that that's what he was trying to tell us. He said, it looks like right now there is a 65% probability that at least some of the fragments of this disrupted comet would collide with Jupiter in July of 1994. And with that information in hand, I looked at Carolyn and I said, our comet is going to collide with Jupiter next year. Carolyn looks and she says, we're going to lose our comet. By this time, Gene is in the darkroom and he's overhearing our conversation. And he says, don't anybody move. Just stay where you are. And you could hear him slamming drawers and protecting film and everything. And finally, he rushes out and sits in the chair I was sitting in to read the message. And all I heard him say was, in my lifetime, we are going to witness a comet colliding with a planet. This is my dream come true. And I remember the rest of the day we were fairly quiet. We didn't say a whole lot. There wasn't that much to say that this comet was going to collide with Jupiter. I remember after we discovered the comet, it was so unusual, its shape was so unusual that it did make it to, I think it was page 19 of section 4 of the New York Times, a small article. When the announcement came out that the comet was going to collide with Jupiter, for the first time in human history, that made it to page 1 of the New York Times and most of the other papers in the world. And that, you know, that day really took all of us on a, it was almost as if we boarded the comet's sidecar and traveled with it for the next year and a quarter. I remember one night early in 1994, another cloudy night, asking Gene, where are you and Carolyn going to be during impact week? And he said, oh, we're going to be in Washington, D.C. Where are you going to be? I said, well, I'm thinking I'd like to be out in California because in Arizona during the summer, the sky is usually pretty cloudy and rainy. And if I go out to California, it will probably be clearer and I'll get a better view of the impacts. And something told me that Gene wasn't quite done yet. So I said, so where are you going to be? And he said, well, Carol and I are going to be in Washington. And he looked at me more intensely and he said, where are you going to be? I said, I just told you I'm going to be in California probably. Where are you going to be? We are going to be in Washington. Where are you going to be? And now he was glaring intently towards me. And I said, I think I'm going to be with you in Washington. And he said, that is what I was hoping you'd say. He said, this is going to be the highlight of our professional lives, even if nobody sees anything. And the team has to be together. We just have to be together. Because what if nobody sees anything? And we all have to hide under a rock someplace. We got to be together. Remember the night before the first impact, there was an article that came out, and it was, and the headline was, "Beware, the great fizzle is coming." And they said that the article said that the impact was going to be, the comet is so small and the planet is so big, we're not going to see anything. It's going to be nothing. And I had already anticipated that response. And I said, even if we don't see anything, because I didn't think we really would, because of that reason, we can always know that we were all alive when this comet collided with Jupiter for the first time in the history of civilization that a comet collided with a planet. Anyway, I wrote to the author of that article and kind of told him my thoughts about it. And he wrote back, he said, I'm glad you wrote, because I'm in a panic. He said, what if the comet breaks apart as it hits Jupiter's upper atmosphere? That turns out to be exactly what happened. As the comet breaks up, there could be a tremendous splash, and it could be something that everybody gets to see. There could be an awful lot to see. And my article may be absolutely wrong. And quite frankly, I'm hoping it is. And he was right that he was wrong. Because the next day, we were at the Space Telescope Science Institute, where they run the Hubble Space Telescope. And we were getting ready in the main auditorium for a press conference. And they were showing us how to behave at an official NASA press briefing, how to sit on our jackets so that they don't get wrinkled, and essentially how to behave. And everything was going well, and until one of the astronomers from the Hubble upstairs came down with a piece of paper and showed it to Gene. Gene looked at it and he just hollered. He said, "You mean they saw plumes?" And I've always liked to think that we have, people do not blurt. They yell, they scream, they raise their voices, but the term blurt is not something that is normally applied to real people. But on that day, the only word I can think of to describe Gene's reaction was he blurted, "You mean they saw plumes?" Right away, everybody jumped out of their seats. We went and found a nearby computer. We all sat and was reading image after image and letter after letter reporting wonderful sightings of a lot of things from the first fragment of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 colliding with Jupiter. That night we had the press conference, and it turned out to be a lot more interesting. It was absolutely packed. And I'm not sure that one was carried live on CNN. I know one of them was during that week. They had told us that if we don't see anything, we'll have press conferences for the first couple of weeks, first couple of days, and then we'll stop. Turned out they had press conference every morning, every day, in what turned out to be by far the busiest day of my life. Some of the press conferences I was at, others Gene and Carolyn were at, but the one on the 20th of July was one that I was sitting at. I'm sitting next to one of the other astronomers when Gene opened the door at the back of the auditorium and he started waving at me and motioning to me to come back. I looked at the person sitting next to me and I said to her, "I'm staying here. This is where I need to be. Nothing is going to persuade me to leave this press conference until it's over." And then Gene came rushing down and he said, "David, you got to come with us." I said, "Why?" And he said, "We've been invited to the White House." I looked at the lady and I said, "Accept that." And she said, "Get out of here." And we left. We went to the White House. And I really appreciated the professionalism that they handled the large crowd that was there that day. There were a lot of scientists, there were astronauts. The real reason they had called that meeting was that this was July the 20th, 1994. It was the 25th anniversary of Neil Armstrong's first step on the moon. That one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind on the moon. It was really extraordinary that that Neil was still living at the time. He didn't like to give speeches. And when he was first invited to come and address the meeting, the group at the White House, he said, "No, I don't give speeches." And then they called him back and they said, "This is the White House. The president will be there. We really need for you to do this." And he said, "Okay, I'll do this." And he gave a wonderful speech. And I guess my favorite line in it was when he said, "It turned out that our old astrogeology mentor, Gene Shoemaker, actually called in one of his comets to mark the occasion with spectacular Jovian fireworks," which is essentially what happened. After that meeting was over, the president walked around and met a few people. We got to meet him, which was really kind of fun. I'm really glad that happened. But as we were about to leave, someone approached us and said, "Excuse me, the vice president wishes to talk with you if you wouldn't mind waiting a few minutes." And Gene looked up and said, "Oh, I think we can manage that." And he came out and he didn't want to talk politics. He wanted to talk about comets. And we were talking with him and it was really fun. This was Al Gore. And I'm thinking as he's talking with Gene that I said, one of the things that I was able to do before you is I was able to see the impact sites, or I will be able to see the impact sites before you do. And then, because I hadn't seen them yet. Anyway, then Gore was looking at us and then he said, "You know, I live on the grounds of the Naval Observatory." And I thought to myself, "Don't say it." And he said, 2 nights ago, he said, "Don't say it. I went to the observatory and I thought, oh no." And I asked if they could show me Jupiter. and I got to see the beautiful dark spots on Jupiter. He saw it before I did. Actually, that was fine. A couple of nights later, we went to the Naval Observatory, where they had opened the observatory for everyone who wanted to come and take a look at the comet impacts. And I really was not anxious to pull rank and go to the front. But every time I tried to get my place in the back of the line, they'd be pushing me up further to the front. And I really didn't want to do that. And finally, a very nice lady stood out and said, "David, wait in line with me." That lady was Vera Lubin. She was standing in line, and we waited our turn and got a beautiful look at the G and the K impact spots on Jupiter. It was just extraordinary to see this proof that the solar system is a dynamic place. Things happen in the solar system. This was the highlight of my career. It was not the highlight of my whole life, but it certainly was the highlight of my professional life. The highlight of my whole life was the fact that I was fortunate enough to meet Wendy and marry Wendy. And what I would like to do now, as I come to a close of this presentation, I would like to invite Wendy to come here, and I'm going to quote one final poem for you. Are you there?
I'm here.
Would you like to come
I
by?
heard you a whole talk.
Okay. And we are going to quote together how I feel, how I really feel when I'm going out under the night sky. It's by Ralph Hodgson, who wrote a poem called The Song of Honor in 1913. And we're going to quote the very end of it to you as we're looking outside. I stood and stared. The sky was lit. The sky was stars all over it. I stood. I knew not why. Without a wish, without a will, I stood upon that silent hill and stared into the sky until my eyes were blind with stars. And still I stared into the sky. Thank you all very much.
And that's my hand waving.
Oh, that was fascinating. Thank you so much, David. It was
Thank you.
so amazing to hear it in your words. Reading about it doesn't do the human emotion of the experience justice. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'll ask Kevin and Jackie if they can be monitoring for any questions. And while they're looking, I do have one question for you. You said when Carolyn first looked at the images that you took of the comet that became Shoemaker-Levy 9, that you weren't sure what exactly you were looking at. It kind of looked like a squashed comet. Can you describe its characteristics a little more to what looked different about it?
Well, it almost looked like it shouldn't be there. Like it could have been an artifact. And if we had just seen it on one image, we probably would have dismissed it as being an artifact of the film, and we wouldn't have done anything about it. But it was on two images, looking pretty much identical in each one, and it had showed that motion. But I looked at both of those, and I couldn't believe it. It really did look like someone had stomped on a comet. It was flattened out. There were like 5 or 6 of those little cometary things, each with a little tail going up. And the more I looked at it, the more detail I could see. The tail, and then the dust lane joining all of the nuclei and going off in each direction. It was an extraordinary thing. And one of the things I forgot to mention in my talk, in my speech tonight, was that after I arrived home, the middle of the night after that momentous observing room, I set up my 16-inch telescope, pointed it to Jupiter, moved the telescope a little bit to the north, and with difficulty was able to make the first visual observation of that lovely, lovely comet.
Wow.
But that was a good question. I hope I was able to answer it satisfactorily.
Yes. What kept you going for, was it 19 years until you discovered a comet? What kept you going?
When I decided to search for comets, I didn't really expect I was going to find one, because my early life was not filled with success, as it is with a lot of younger people nowadays. Anyway, I went a long, long time just looking. But as I was looking, I realized how much fun I was having looking at the sky using mostly this telescope. And then when I relocated to Arizona, the 16-inch Miranda, which I still use, and it still is there in the observatory that has just been rebuilt. And I use that one, I use this one, and I use a new telescope that Scotty Roberts from Explore Scientific sent me a couple of years ago. It's a 12-inch Dobson with a, just a truss mounting that's supposedly very easy to set up, and it is. But once I was able to get it aligned, I'm leaving it set up in the observatory now. But right now, that is the highest quality, second highest quality telescope I have. The highest quality one is the 8-inch that I've had since 1964, even before this one. It's called Pegasus. I remember looking at Mars through a beautiful apochromatic refractor in 2003 and thinking this is the best image of Mars I've ever seen. But before I go in, I'm going to try with my 8-inch telescope to see. And it was better in the 8-inch. So that is the best telescope I got optically. And I've used all of these telescopes in my search for comets, which is still going on.
Okay, I have a question for you from Parker Lessig. He says, do you recall the camera settings for your first two images?
Yeah, I do, but I can't give them to you as numbers. It was an 18, actually I can. It was an 18-inch Schmidt camera. That was the diameter of the objective lens. The mirror was a lot larger than that. And we had 6-inch diameter films, which would cover a field of approximately 7 or 8 degrees, a large, large field at one shot. And we took a 8-minute exposure and then got cloudy again. And I remember when we started to take a look, there were some light clouds in the field, and I didn't think I'd be able to find the guide star. I was able barely to see it, but I was able to remember thinking that I sure hope I don't have to show this picture to the public because it's going to be terrible. And it turned out that was the most important two photographs I've ever taken.
Okay, well, I have another question, and
Sure.
I'm trying to interpret the question from Joe Wright. Perhaps it's because you name your.
Oh, hi, Joe.
He asked, where is Echo? Is that one of your telescopes or something else?
No, I know exactly what he means. And I'm so glad you asked that question. You just made my day. Echo is my first telescope. I got it as a bar mitzvah present on September the 1st, 1960. And the question is, where is it now? Would you believe it is in Kansas City? You may look at it tomorrow. It is at the Linda Hall Library of Science. I donated it to them a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic started. And along with a lot of my other things they have, I think it actually has a Library of Congress catalog number. Although it's not a book, it's a telescope, but it's there and you can see it. That's my first telescope.
That's amazing. Linda Hall is such a wonderful resource for Kansas City and for scientists all over the world. And
Oh, it's
I knew
great.
you had donated several observing logs, but I'd forgotten about the telescope.
I've
Interesting.
donated all of my observing logs, all of my personal diaries. In fact, every time I go there, they want more stuff. And I keep giving it to them, but I'm wondering if they're going to come and they're going to say, why don't you just give us your house?
Well, we are so grateful that you have that relationship with Linda Hall, because we are the recipients of some of that wealth of knowledge and just history that
I would not be
resides-
surprised if some of the staff people from Linda Hall are among your listeners tonight. But I think if any of you have not visited the library, please do yourselves a favor and go to it. I think it's the best library I've ever seen. Of course, I haven't seen the Library of Congress, although I'd like to see that someday. I think a library is as good as a night sky. I've never walked into a library, any library, and not left it feeling better than when I entered. And Linda Hall is one of those.
You know, that's a wonderful thing about libraries. I mean, there aren't that many places that you can say that about. Well, does anybody who's monitoring Facebook see any questions that we have on the Facebook side? I don't see any more on our Zoom side.
We had one come in through our chat from Mark Blanken.
Okay.
Just curious if David was able to get out and do more observing during the pandemic.
Oh, yes. Yeah, Wendy and I were very, very careful. Essentially, we stayed at home for the year and a half of the pandemic, only going out to go to the grocery store. We go to doctor's appointments, but always wearing masks when we left the house. As soon as we were able to get shots, we got our vaccines. And I'm begging you, if you haven't gotten your vaccine now, I am begging you to get it. Please get your vaccines.
Getting the shots.
What did I say on the way home?
When after we got our shots, we only lived 5 minutes from the pharmacy. David's going, I'm gonna live.
Yeah, I remember that.
And if you haven't gotten your shot, you cannot believe the difference how you feel as soon as you get that shot in your arm, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, okay, protection has started. It has begun. So anyway, that's just my spiel for this.
Yeah. Anyway, any other questions? I'm still here.
Terry, I don't know if there's anything on Facebook. Those are the last questions we've had through our chat and our Q&A line.
All right. Well, David, thank you so very much for being with us tonight. It's always such a pleasure, and I learned so much. I was telling you earlier that I've been researching some 19th century scientists, and it's just after researching all of those who tended to be comet hunters, it was fascinating to hear from a modern day comet hunter.
Well, thank you. It is something that I do, and if I can have some bragging rights, I may not be the sharpest tool in the box. However, I don't know of anybody who is more passionate about the night sky than I am. I will go out any night to look and see what is there. I always begin with a once over to see if anything has changed. Is there a nova in the sky? In 1975, there was. Is there, just to see if anything's changed? What satellites are moving around? Is Jeff Bezos still orbiting the Earth and increasing his Amazon sales? And you never really know. But I love looking out at the night sky, and I really enjoy going to these meetings.
Well, thank you so much. We hope sometime in the future we'll be able to have you back again. And
I
thank
love
you.
that.
We'll look forward to it. So welcome everyone. And we're going to have a short business meeting. If you've joined us live on Facebook, we'll have just a few minutes of announcements and club business. So I'm going to ask Alan Lehman if he would unmute and give us an update on the ASKC library.
Sure thing. Despite the temporary absence of our librarian, the library is up and running and functional. We have a large collection of books, as we always have, for members to utilize. If anybody wants to browse the library catalog, it's available at askc.libib.com. It's our online library catalog. If you register, you can also place books on hold there, and we'll get a message and arrange for them to be delivered to you. I noticed there was a discussion about the David Barron's book, American Eclipse, on the forum past day or two. That one is in fact in our library, and it's an excellent work if anybody wants to check it out.
Great.
That's all I've got.
All right, thank you. Well, I emailed Scott Kranz, who is the manager of our dark sky site, and he was not able to be with us tonight, but I know we have several new members who are interested in learning about the dark sky site, learning to use their telescopes. So Scott says he is trying to plan an orientation session for September. So make sure you check out the Cosmic Messenger for an announcement on that if you are interested in getting familiarized with the dark sky site and perhaps learning to use your brand new telescope that you bought during COVID lockdown. All right, Powell Observatory update. David Young, what can you tell us about Powell Observatory now?
Dome still sticks, but we're slugging it through. We're still doing programs outside. Actually, Scott and Alan and I and was it Rick from Derek was there too, but Rick, God, I can't think of his last name. Hildebrand. We're down at the dark sky site today. We mowed and sweated and murdered grass in the gravel and fixed some other stuff. So the dark sky site's ready for you guys to visit also.
Thank you for your hard work. We appreciate that.
One more thing, check the website for apparel that we now have online. You can buy jackets and vests and t-shirts and hats, etc. All stored at my house in the warehouse.
So the apparel is really sharp. I've seen them in person and they are really sharp looking. So get out, wear your ASKC gear so we can get some free advertising from you wearing your sharp looking ASKC gear. And just a reminder, Powell is open the first and third Saturdays of the month. So our next two Saturdays will be the 7th and the 21st of August. All right, Elizabeth Brown is going to tell us about Second Saturday Astronomy and what we've got planned.
Okay, thank you. Well, for the past year or so, we've been having some general astronomy programs on the second Saturday of each month. And I'm looking forward to possibly getting some more speakers lined up. So certainly if anybody out there is enthusiastic about something in astronomy that you really, really love, like maybe observing the sun or something, astronomy related, I certainly would like to hear from you. My email's in the Cosmic Messenger. Our next talk will be August the 14th. Gerald Williams is going to talk to us about ancient astronomers who thousands of years ago, without computers and GPS, managed to figure out the diameter of the Earth and the distance of the Earth to the moon and calculations like that. Should be a very interesting talk. September, Denise Moser is going to continue her talk about observing the moon. So anyway, the members will be receiving a email, fast blast email. Click on that link and that'll take you to a registration form. And once you fill that out, we will send you a email link to the second Saturday talk, which is at 7 o'clock on the second Saturdays. If you come through Facebook, you go through our website. So that's basically it. And I'm looking forward to maybe hearing from some of you about some talks you might be interested in giving. So that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. And I see there's a typo on my slide. I said amateur astronomers, and I meant to write ancient astronomers. So make sure you note that. It is about ancient astronomers.
Right, ancient.
Well, some of us are a little ancient.
I suppose they were the first amateurs.
Okay, well, just a super brief update on the Powell relocation. I know for many of us, it seems like, we're moving at the pace of a snail on this relocation, but things are starting to accelerate. So just so everybody in the membership knows, the board of directors voted this last Monday to move ahead with signing a contract with Keller and Associate fundraising consultants. So that will be kicking our fundraising into high gear. And the property purchase of the 77-acre site that Rick Henderson has shared in previous meetings is right now in the negotiation stage. So further updates to come, but progress is being made. And I'm going to ask Jay Manifold to unmute so that he can give us his Manifold Minute.
My manifold minute, don't count down on me. Okay, we need the first Perseid slide up. This is typically the best meteor shower of the year. And this year is almost certainly going to be because it's occurring during a waxing, fairly thin crescent moon that's only about 1/5 illuminated. So weather permitting, on Thursday, August 12th, we're going to see a bunch of meteors. The very peak of the thing is actually in the afternoon, our time, but it should still be quite good overnight that night. Again, weather permitting. There's a whole bunch of numbers on this slide, but that ZHR 110 means that in theory, it'll be possible to see 110 meteors an hour. I think that assumes certain perfect things about conditions that tend not to happen, but lots and lots of meteors. That night in Lewisburg, the sun sets at 8:16, and astronomical twilight, which is when the sun is 18 degrees below the horizon and it's really, really dark, is a few minutes before 10, and the moon sets less than an hour later. So again, the moon will not be interfering, and it possibly will be a very good night. Now, the other slide is going to be a light pollution map, and it's from a little while back, but it gives you some idea of where to go. The two blue stars down kind of towards the bottom in the yellow area, the left one is where Powell is now, and the right one is at Cedar Cove, which is where we are hoping eventually to move the facility. And I would, in general, recommend getting out at least into the yellow, somewhere around the metro, in order to watch meteors. In general, the farther out, the better, but at least try to get out into that yellow area. Now, this is a weeknight, so going to be a little tough for some people. We can't always get these things scheduled on weekends, but anyway, looking forward to this one, hoping for clear skies and see lots of meteors. So that's it.
Great. Thank you, Jay.
Thank
You everyone for joining us, and we will sign off for tonight. Join us on second Saturday, which will be the talk that Gerald Williams is going to give us about ancient astronomers and how they used observations with no modern technology to measure the size of the Earth. So we look forward to that. Good night, everyone. Stay safe.